Hi Tribe, your mom of three in NYC, here with part 2 of day 6. Please make sure you check out part 1 of day 6. I reviewed Genesis chapters 35, 36, 37, 38. Here in part 2, we're going to review 39, 40, 41, and 42. I'll be reading the NIV version. I'm so rude. Hi, if it's your first time here, my name is Teneza. I am on a journey to read through the Bible. Come along. In Genesis chapter 39. Remember, guys, Joseph was sold by his brother. So now Joseph is in Egypt. He is the slave of Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials. In verse 2, this verse is the inspiration for the theme for today's review. I'm going to read it. In verse 2 of chapter 39, the Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. So that is the title for today's review, guys. The Lord is with you. It says in verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph. Alrighty. So I have in my notes that even as a slave, Joseph had favor. He was put in charge of Potiphar's entire household. In verse 5, it said, from the time he put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. Amazing. It also says that Potiphar's wife wanted to sleep with Joseph. She literally asked him every single day, and he refused. In verse 10, though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. But one day, he went into the house to attend to his duties. She caught him by the cloak and said, come to bed with me. He said no. He left the cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. Look, this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. And when he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak and ran out of the house. She lied on him. Not only that, she told Potiphar the same lie. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But again, so he was sold into slavery by his brothers, but yet God was with him and showed him favor. Potiphar put him over his entire household. He was lied on by Potiphar's wife and thrown into prison. But again, God was still with Joseph. It says in verse 21, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. In verse 22, the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden had paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. In chapter 40, the baker and the cupbearer of Pharaoh offended him, and they were put into the same prison as Joseph. Both of them had dreams. The cupbearer had a dream of a vine with 3 branches. It budded, blossomed with grapes. He took the grapes, he squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put it in his hand. The meaning Joseph gave to him, in 3 days, Pharaoh will restore you. And he said to him, please remember me. The baker had a dream. On his head were 3 baskets of bread full of baked goods, but birds were eating them. Joseph was able to translate the dream for him. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift your head. He will hang you on a tree, and birds will eat your flesh. So the cupbearer's dream had a really good meaning, and the baker's dream, not so good meaning. But I wanted to read for you verses 20 through 23. The third day was Pharaoh's birthday. He gave a feast for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of his chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. And that ends chapter 40. In chapter 41, 2 years have passed. Pharaoh has 2 dreams that no one could interpret. In the first dream, he was standing by the Nile. He went out of the river. There came up 7 cows in verse 2 of chapter 41, sleek and fat, and they gazed among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the Nile and stood beside those on the riverbank. The cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. He fell asleep again. He had a second dream. In the second dream, 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy, full heads. Then Pharaoh woke up. It had been a dream. So in the morning, his mind was troubled. He sent for all the magicians, all the wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them the dreams, but no one could interpret them. Again, guys, this is 2 years later. This is 2 years after he had interpreted the dream of the baker and the cupbearer. In verse 9 of chapter 41, the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Today I am reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with the servant, he imprisoned me, and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream. A young Hebrew was there who was able to interpret the dreams." So Pharaoh in verse 14 sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought. Pharaoh tells Joseph both of his dreams. In verse 25, Joseph said to Pharaoh, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. It is one and the same dream." In verse 27, the 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterward are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It says that in verse 29, the 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow. The abundance of the land will not be remembered because the famine that follows it will be so severe. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. And so, because Joseph was able to interpret the dream, he was put in charge in verse 41. "I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt." Again, God's favor. God's favor. Pharaoh took a signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen, put a gold chain around his neck. In verse 44, "I am the Pharaoh, but without your word, no one will lift hand or foot in all of Egypt." Joseph was 30 years old at this time. During the 7 years of abundance, Joseph collected all the food produced and stored it in the cities. He stored up huge quantities of grain before the years of the famine came. So then after the 7 years of abundance, they came to an end. The famine began just as Joseph had said. Amazing, right? So and that ends chapter 41. Chapter 42. Jacob, remember Jacob, Joseph's dad, learned that there was grain in Egypt. He said to his sons, "Go down there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die." 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt. Joseph was the governor of the land, the one who sold the grain. When his brothers arrived, As soon as he saw his brothers, Joseph recognized them. They did not recognize him. He says that they're spies. You have come to see where the land's unprotected. They say, no, we've come to buy food. He says, no, in verse 12. You have come to see where the land's unprotected. They replied, your servants were 12 brothers, the sons of one man. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no more. Joseph in verse 14 says, for the third time, you are spies. And in verse 15, this is how you'll be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one to get your brother. The rest of you will be kept in prison so that your words may be tested. If you are not, then as surely as Pharaoh lives, you are spies. He put them all in custody for 3 days. On the third day, Joseph says, do this and you will live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers stay here in prison, while the rest of you go back and take the grain to your starving households. But you must bring your youngest brother to me. They said, surely we are being punished because of our brother. Reuben said, didn't I tell you guys not to sin against that boy? But you would not listen. They did not recognize that Joseph could understand them. He turns away from them and begins to weep. Joseph gave orders to fill all their bags with grain and to put each man's silver back in his sack. They loaded their grain onto donkeys and they left. When they stopped for the night, they opened their sacks and saw that not only was the grain there, but also the silver. They came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan. They told him all that had happened. They said, the man who was Lord over the land, verse 30, spoke harshly to us and treated us as though we were spying on the land. But we said to him, we are honest men, we are not spies. Verse 33, the man who was Lord over the land said to us, this is how I will know whether you are honest with me. Leave one of your brothers, take the food back to your starving households, bring your youngest brother to me, so that I know that you all are not spies. They were emptying their sacks. They saw their silver. Their father saw the money pouches. They were frightened. Their father said to them, you have deprived me of my children. Joseph is no more. Simeon is no more. And now you want to take Benjamin. Everything is against me. But Reuben said to his father, you may put both of my sons to death if I do not bring him back to you. Entrust him to my care. I will bring him back. Jacob said, my son will not go down there with you. His brother is dead. He's the only one left. If harm comes to him on the journey you are taking, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in sorrow. So that ends chapter 42, day 6. All right. Wow, what a lot of material we've covered today. Lots of meat and potatoes. Tomorrow, we will be reviewing Genesis chapters 43 through 50. That is the end of Genesis. What a week 1. All right. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening, and I will see you in tomorrow's review. Bye for now.